All right. Today I have the privilege of having Salman Paracha join us for the Backprop podcast. And so, Salman, thank you so much for being here. And you've had a remarkable career spanning work at Amazon. I think you worked on Amazon Coin early on, and then
Yeah.
built serverless and edge computing systems on AWS, and then worked on cloud infrastructure at Oracle. And now you're building Katanemo and Arch and all these things at a startup. And so I'd love for you to just, share a little bit about your journey and kind of all the things that you've done that have inspired you to get to what you're building today.
Hey, thanks, Sarmad. I appreciate it. I know how I got into this podcast because I plugged myself into your other podcast in a comment section saying, you've got to have me on. So I appreciate you bringing me on. And, just
It's a
sort of
privilege
because,
for us.
no, this is super cool. And I've been following all the work that you all been doing at Last Mile with your MCP agent server and the framework that you recently launched. So kudos on those launches. I know you all worked the Christmas break to get it out there. And it looks like there's a whole bunch of traction and community contribution already. A bit about me, for those who may not have heard of me, my name is Salman. I'm leading and co-founder and CEO of a company called Katanemo. We describe ourselves as operating at the intersection of science and infrastructure for Gen AI developers. And the thesis really has been, Sarmad, that for all the past background that I have and Adil has, who's my co-founder, we've really been thinking. We have always thought about like these building blocks that handle the pesky heavy lifting, so if you would, that enable developers to do more. So with AWS and naturally with the rise of cloud infrastructure, the idea was giving developers new superpowers so that they could rapidly experiment, get to the market faster, and not focus on the crufty but critical work, but crufty work on knowing how to store objects in S3 or recreating file systems or recreating database technologies, etc. And so the thesis for Katanemo and for us at the moment, having spent so much time building internet scale services, is how do we identify and uh, sort of eliminate the pesky heavy lifting for developers building Gen AI. And if you've seen the past year and a half, we've literally gone from very simplistic retrieval systems
Yeah.
to like fully autonomous multi-agent systems. And I, as a builder in the space, have a hard time keeping up, let alone developers. So we just want to build in the space where we're offering these new building blocks. The way I describe it is intelligent building blocks, so that developers can do more in Gen AI and focus on core business logic and core user experience versus putting it all together and getting it right. So we hope that some of our expertise in terms of building these infrastructure building blocks will come to bear. And half the team is PhD applied scientists from Meta and Microsoft Research, and the other half team is distributed systems engineers from Amazon, Lyft, and others. So
That's a
truly at the
marriage made in
intersection.
heaven.
I mean, I would hope. Let's see how developers react to it as we grow and
Yeah.
scale some of our products. But it is truly operating at that intersection, and that's been the sort of the marching cry for the business and how we go to market essentially. So that's me in a bit of a quick nutshell,
That's
if you would.
awesome. I'm
Yeah.
curious actually. So, you mentioned how AI applications have gone from, I mean, even before retrieval systems, they were just like prompting LLMs, and that was like the cutting edge.
Yeah.
We think about like that was a year and a half ago, and so it's crazy how far we've gotten. And nowadays, I think when people talk about retrieval, and now they're also talking about agents, they're talking about these compound, complex AI applications. And so I'm curious, like, how would you define an agentic application in your own
Yeah.
words? And what are kind of the core building blocks that you see that are required for developers to build them well?
I describe it to, first of all, I don't now use the word agents when talking to customers. I'm
Hmm.
truly trying to understand the problem they're trying to solve.
Yeah.
I think if this is a bit of the shiny object is in front of us, it's both AI and agents, and we usually work backwards from those. And I think that does not the actual customer journey or the customer outcomes good service,
Yeah.
let alone like figuring out ourselves, do we operate in this vendor's dictionary or the other vendor's dictionary. So I tend to move away from them saying, let's talk about the user experience.
I love
Ultimately,
that.
I think if you see what large language models have come to bear, it is this exceptional user experience of not having to beep and bop between different websites. Let's imagine Google search, and finding the right nugget of wisdom versus just get me the answer, which is just magical, and it truly is, right?
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, if we were to take descriptions and definitions, I think agents, the way we have been talking about it in the market, both with Anthropic or OpenAI or whoever, I think they operate at a spectrum,
Mm.
sort of a spectrum of agency. And if you think of it as a spectrum of agency, which you have low agency retrieval systems, very little to low agency, uh, being able to do actions and tasks using natural language, more agency, and then being able to give a complete goal and say you're on your own and go accomplish this goal and whatever means necessary, which is full agency. So I think sort of agentic applications across the spectrum with full control, medium-ish control, and then, hey, I'm going to let you loose because I think you can do things I would never have imagined to do otherwise. And I think it's fair to say there's needs across all these different sort of this spectrum where you can see how certain enterprise customers, mid-market customers, startups would take these things and try to create experiences that match to their end goals and outcomes. So agentic to me is the ability to not only get information, but complete action with a level of agency. If you think about like for a large language model, you control temperature, right? Because
Yeah.
temperature essentially is saying you can be either very precise or it's free
Yeah.
form. It's similar
Determinism.
to
Yeah.
that's right. And I think for me, if I look at what our customers are building with some of our products and they are trying to express that level of agency, but they can't say it. Everyone wants to use the word agent because guess what? You don't want to be left behind.
Yeah.
Not calling yourself an agent, but I think ultimately, I mean that may not make a whole bunch of sense unless you think of a customer problem, solving those problems. And in some cases, you need full agency for sure.
I love that. And I also think that with all the hype, there is this idea that, AI is a panacea for, solving all the world's problems, which it isn't. We still have to focus on use cases and whatnot. I'm curious if, like, especially from all the experience you have building distributed systems in the past, if there are like, is there a new paradigm shift for the architecture involved for these kinds of applications? Is it different based on how much agency you're giving these systems? How do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think about it from the lens of what do I believe won't change versus
Hmm.
what I think is changing. That framework has helped me sort of across the board thinking about building durable systems. And I'll give you an example of it. So what won't change? I think users would demand these systems to be faster.
Yeah.
I don't think that changes. Users would want to be able to have control over these systems and want to express their goals in their ways and in natural ways. I think that user experience was just it's like my indoctrination to what Jeff said at Amazon. I will never see a world where someone said, "Hey, could you ship my packages slower? Could you give me higher prices?
Yeah.
Could you have less selection?" Right? And so in that case, I start the framing of what do I think won't change in this new world? And
Hmm.
then how do we think about technologies and architectures that fit into this new world? So those are the two basic sort of rubric exercises I go through. So what I think won't change, I do think people would want to move and have a separation of concern in terms of business logic, true business logic, whether that's the number of steps you want to take for a large language model to complete something, or being able to build functions and tools for large language models to access data that is very specific to you and your domain. And
Yeah.
there's that business logic separation from what I like to call infrastructure software or platform or tooling,
Hmm.
where some of the abstractions or the common scenarios are managed and pushed down into the platform, into the infrastructure, so you can focus on higher level objectives. I think that won't change in this world too. A
Yeah.
clear example is vector databases. I don't think developers want to store vector databases on flat files,
Yeah.
right? Right. I think these embeddings are stored in a highly reduced dimensionality space on a highly optimized store, which is called a vector store. And you
Yeah.
can say whether that's Pinecone, VV8, Quadrant, whoever that might be.
Yeah.
But once again, you see a reemergence of a database building block
Yeah.
for this new world. I think if you think about GPUs as specialized hardware to run some of this LLMs or some of your applications for parallelization, that's a specialized building block as well.
Yeah.
And I look at that entire stack and say, I see a lot of the um, commonality in terms of blocks, but not the implementation. In
Mm,
terms of like thinking about the infrastructure stack, you will need some middleware to be able to do things, and that's the stuff we'll talk about at the end. What we're focused on,
yeah.
and you will need some evaluation testing suite,
Yeah.
different, but for this type of workload. And I think my inspiration has always been you've got to treat this new workload with first class citizen uh, type of view.
Mm,
And much like Oracle, when the internet emerged, said they had key value stores in a relational database. Sure,
yeah.
it's functional, but not really purpose built. And like DynamoDB and the
Yeah.
others of the like key value stores like took off and just said, we're going to leave this behind and we're going to focus on this new workload. So I think a lot of the core like drawing like squares of on a whiteboard
Yeah.
potentially stay the same. The implementations and the architectures within those are dramatically different. Like I think APIs for microservices architecture will dealt very differently than traditional RPC calls,
Mm,
rate limiting, authorization, access management, and control, and having clear boundaries of what you can do and what you cannot do. And I think now prompts are that new future of interactivity. And so, how
right.
do you design for that type of new workload where there's non-determinism? How do you design for that? How do you build for that? So, I think the building largely the shapes, the three-legged stool, if you would, or the four-legged stool, if you would generally stay the same, but everything will be reinvented in the space. And so that's how I've been thinking about this space, which is what won't change where developers want to accelerate their journey, and what
Yeah.
is the building blocks that must be reinvented so developers can move much faster.
I love that. And I get asked that question a lot as a startup founder, as I'm sure you're aware, like the space is faster moving than I think any tectonic shift in computing that came before
That's
it.
right.
So how do we as founders, build for or plan for even a few months or a year out? And I love that framing of what are the things that we know are gonna, be true even a year from now. Um,
That's right.
and the other thing you mentioned is like history rhymes, but it doesn't repeat. And so, like the distributed system architecture is still really the critical piece for LLM operations, but it
Yeah.
there is customization there. There's new compute workloads happening. I'm curious if there's
Yeah.
like one or two pieces that you think are especially missing, or like the highest impact kind of areas that people should look into that is kind of like underexplored at the moment.
I think it's not underexplored, but it's a really, really hard problem. One is evaluations. I
Yeah,
think I think you all are working on some of that technology using
yeah,
small language models. Of course, I was very curious to when you guys launched something on the modern BERT stuff and looking
yeah,
at that piece. So I think that's super important, um, and certainly very interesting. And then I think the ability to think about, as you just mentioned, how do you orchestrate the right user experience amongst multiple models or multiple
yeah.
and agents? And how do you think about maintaining the right amount of memory and right amount of state? And so one of the things that we're working on is how do we think about that middleware component so that you
Mm,
can actually build a lot more and a lot faster by focusing on that true application logic piece. I think
yeah.
there are the evaluations is like without which I think people have vibe checks and one day your customers will really get upset when you can't like solve a multi-turn question. Like today, I know firsthand a really large company across the lake from where I am at the moment is struggling to have accurate responses on a multi-turn, multi-round conversation with customers. It's a mega company. And that's
Yeah,
because we have to think through the user experience very differently versus the point, shoot, and click and forms that we fill out essentially,
yeah,
right? So I think evaluations super interesting. Perhaps new techniques like small models for speed and efficiency, very important. Um, and then that middleware componentry, which I think applies guardrails at the right points, applies routing to the right models for the right reasons, be
yeah.
able to take out critical information from a prompt so there's more structured representation so you can improve retrieval accuracy. That is, I think, an area that's ongoing, and a lot of work is happening in these two spaces at the moment.
I think you touched upon a couple of things that I wanted to ask a little bit more about. So one is I read in your Arch GitHub repo this phrase intelligent prompt routing, and that
Yeah.
mentioned prompts being like a building block in general. And then also there's the security aspect of it. There's the evals aspect, which is slightly like different from the security and jailbreaking like prevention aspect.
Yeah,
So
guardrails and evaluation are slightly
yeah,
different, but related. Uh, so routing, I think the critical piece at the moment that we hear a lot from customers, like Paper.ai, even Twilio, and some folks in the community who join our Discord channel, is that people are trying to build an evaluation suite and look
yeah,
at usage patterns, right? For example, Gemini is actually pretty decent at creating video. Some individual has made that distinction, a subjective distinction, that this is the thing I want to use for video creation.
right.
Similarly, they've made a distinction that Claude 3.7 Sonnet is exceptional for structured document creation.
Yeah,
And if they are doing truly creative marketing copy, GPT 4.7 or 4.5, sorry, will
yeah,
be really good for that. And they want to express these outcomes and goals in simple, plain language and have something magically inspect the prompt and saying, yeah, this looks like a usage goal that relates to document creation. And guess what? We have a very one-to-one mapping for those user scenarios to 3.7 Sonnet. So that's the ability to now incorporate new models and ability to actually use the strengths and leverage a new innovation almost instantly.
yeah,
I do think you need to run an evaluation cycle. I think without evaluations, you're just running afoot,
yeah,
and everyone should just be really good at that and look at what Last Mile is doing in that space. But when you do a production traffic and you manage traffic, uh, how do you make those decisions? And so right now, that's the work that we're doing, which enables developers to sort of incorporate these new models, these new innovations at, at the lightning speed by just expressing goal orientation, not quality orientation, and saying, I think I know what I want to use for these type of scenarios, and just take the traffic there and rate limit it, or do the traditional high resiliency things that you would expect from a middleware component like Arch would do, and get me time back. I want to do more evaluations of new models, or I want to write new scenarios. If that's the time I need back.
So if just thinking of it from the use cases and user experience perspective, today if I go into ChatGPT, I can ask it to like, write me code or write me a cover letter or generate an image. And I think behind the scenes, they have some kind of routing happening where some of the requests are going to Dolly for image generation and others are going to some other model and maybe they're A/B testing a few things. Is that like how you're thinking about the routing value prop from a user experience perspective?
That's right. In many ways, from a developer perspective. So
Hmm.
they are an end user and consumer who should never have to figure out, like, they have a drop down that no one can figure out today, by the way. So they have this,
Getting
like,
very
I can't.
complicated. Yeah.
Yeah, how do I think about these things? I think they're going to get rid of that drop down pretty soon. But
Yeah.
it's about giving people choice and control, which is a thing I think won't change.
Yeah.
Developers who want to have control over the user experience are deciding today, hey, I want some traffic to go to Gemini just when I want to prompt it for video creation, image creation, or whatever that scenario might be. And I don't particularly care for Dolly because we are a company that competes with OpenAI, and we are partnered up with Gemini. Just give
Yeah.
you one example. But that's only for that use case. But if I'm trying to like figure out if I have structured document creation, or I'm in a single prompt, I'm doing three tasks, I need for someone to just be able to make these calls parallel or sequential, scatter, gather. And I don't want to be in the business of figuring all that out myself.
Right.
And be able to move quickly by saying, I know my usage patterns, I know the end targets, just get the stuff there. The
Yeah.
nuance, of course, is a prompt is non-deterministic. So they can't make a one-to-one mapping. It needs to be a very scientifically enriched model that can then figure these nuances out and saying, yeah, this is a task truly related to image generation, or this portion is, and then this is why we should go there. So that's part of the routing work that we're building amongst the more traditional routing, which is deterministic routing that
Mm.
we do today, which is you just give us the headers and we just make sure we get the traffic to where it needs to be and is resilient. I think that's interesting, but the
Yeah.
true innovation is I'm telling you my usage scenario, my goal
Yeah.
scenario. And now I'm telling you which of these models is good for that. So that's some of the work that we're doing in that front.
How does that work from a implementation perspective? Are you because one of the things that I've noticed is people have forgotten about predictive ML a little bit and are trying to do every single thing with these larger language models. Is the routing component an LLM of its own? Is it like a predictive kind of like classifier? How does it work under
Yeah,
the?
that's a good question. Yeah, the under the covers, it is actually today a 500 million autoregressive language model.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is that when you are trying to, there is a task level granularity mismatch. I could have a very specific prompt, and my usage scenario is a higher level representation of all similar
Yeah.
things that fit to that usage scenario. So either we could build a predictive classifier for sure, but then for every customer, you would probably have to fine tune that classifier because there's
Right.
usage scenario mismatch. That's time, that's hard to get right, and then there's cycles wasted. And the cycles we want to give you back now, developers are figuring that part out with us. The auto-regressive nature of saying, hey, you've gotten an input, now you must create an output that matches to one of these sequences means that the classification is happening in an auto-regressive way. And then you can train the model on different techniques, meta learning techniques, to be able to do these granularity mismatches really well, as long as
Mm,
you have the right data set. And then it becomes, I am predicting based on this that I need to map to one of these scenarios, and I'm going to start producing tokens. And then you do a fuzzy match and saying that's how it's going to get done. We have seen almost an exceptional performance of a smaller autoregressive approach here versus
mm,
a classical predictive approach because developers would just specify usage in however they feel,
yeah.
right? They won't, and your labels may not map to their labels. And all of a sudden, they're like, I don't want all that work. I just want to express this is an image creation. Why can't you figure it out that the task
Yeah.
that I was prompting the language model for? So it's a small model. We do believe in small models as well for very specific scenarios. And so that's the technology that's going underneath the covers, not a predictive classifier model, not a aggressive one,
It's
quantized.
almost the best of both worlds then, because half a billion parameter model is still like you can serve it very quickly, efficiently, and you still get the auto-regressive properties of like a larger language model, but that baked into the behavior of that. So that seems pretty interesting overall.
I think what we have learned having built these classifier models is they are very precise and they're
Yeah.
super accurate. The flexibility that developers want are perhaps more better expressed by autoregressive. And these 500 million parameter models, the ones that we're building, if you quantize them down, they're actually going to tend to take up less than 200 meg total space.
Oh,
And
wow.
benchmarks, yeah, if you quantize them out of 4-bit, it is less than 200 meg, 200, 250 meg or less than that. So it's very small footprint for a model. And then the latency is based on, so we are experimenting VLLM, SGLang, and all other hosting things. And SGLang is producing exceptional throughput down
Mm,
to about less than 80 to 70 milliseconds to make that prediction. And
wow.
that's exceptional for an autoregressive model, but that means it should be the latency should be non-existent to a developer.
Right.
And I talked about, I think people will eventually care about speed. They may not care about it as much today, but
Yeah.
users are never happy. It's like I worked at Amazon, right? And the thing was, hey, 7-day shipping is cool. Can you get it down to 3 days? The moment you did 3 days, can you do it like now in 1 hour? Like it's
Yeah.
just the nature of humans, right? And so that's
Absolutely. No, and it's
yeah.
crazy how how fast inference is now for some of the smaller models as well. Like I run Olama on my MacBook Pro,
Ah, it's amazing.
like running a Llama 7B or even a DeepSeek R1, it's like so fast. And I was actually thinking even streaming was an art it may become an artifact one day when like, outputs become so fast that you don't need to stream them the same way that we do today.
I
It's
think streaming was there because it's a bug, not a feature.
yeah.
Yeah, for
Exactly.
sure.
And it
For sure.
complicated all the APIs for all these models. Like,
Yeah, the server-side rendering events and all that other mumbo jumbo that has to happen to get these things right. And we built some of that technology in the gateway because we had to. And we're like, wait, hold on a second. What bug are we trying to like patch over? Speed, eventually speed, but like when you load a website, the beautiful thing about a website when it loads and it's super fast is it's there.
yeah.
Right? Right? I think if you ask me, I have very high conviction. that the future we're getting towards is it needs to be as fast as a website load time. And one
Yeah.
other example there is it was a measured thing that if you get to 1.9 second load time for an Amazon page, product page, the drop off between 1.9 seconds and 2.1 seconds was about 35%. Like that was the
35%
yeah,
or
that was a
200
drop off.
millisecond difference
That
load
was a
time.
drop off. And when you get it
Wow.
down to a certain like people are like, and that's the human perception of latency, which I think what streaming does solve for, which is I think something's happening, so let me wait, versus it's there. And I think we're going to get to have to get to it. It's there. As a user, I'm not satisfied.
Absolutely. That's really cool. Wow. That just blew my mind a little bit. 1.9 versus
Yeah.
2.1.
I think it was 2.2 or 1.9, about 300 millisecond difference and a 30%
Wow.
drop. Like, whoa, what's happening here?
Incredible.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But at their scale, you can also imagine the users are now like really been conditioned to an
Yeah.
exceptional experience, and anything that deviates from it is like it's not worth my time.
That's true.
Yeah.
Um, One thing I think you launched Arch recently. You announced it on Product Hunt and you launched it
Yeah.
on Hacker News and whatnot. And so would love for you to like just describe a little bit. We talked about some of the core pieces, some of the implementation, but what's your vision for it? And like what's the North Star that you see for how it fits into the AI application infrastructure going forward?
Sure. Thanks for that plug. I think the way we think about it is once again, what are the core building blocks, durable building blocks that have sustained the test of time, which enable developers to move faster? So I did not work at application load balancing at AWS, but application load balancing was at the network layer before, where you want to make sure that user requests get routed to the right servers for better reliability reasons, right? And then it moved to layer 7, which is HTTP traffic. So you can actually do, actual validation of input, validation of output,
Yeah.
and save developers more time. Then it moved to APIs. So API Gateway and Kong and all emerged to manage that type of scenario. So now we have built Arch, which is a prompt gateway, essentially, an edge and egress proxy for agentic applications. And
Mm.
the edge part of it tries to do things such as extract critical information from the prompt, present that to developers to improve retrieval, action-oriented accuracy, like an API call, like send something to on a Slack message. And at the edge, we determine things like guardrails, determine
Yeah.
things like which agent to route this particular task to for improved performance. Like you could have a reporting agent versus a research agent. So
Mm.
so Arch is taking a lot of the learnings we have had over time, and now this is the plug for Adil, who is the co-founder on Katanemo, who built Envoy proxy at Lyft.
That's
So
a
Envoy,
very core part of a lot of companies' infrastructure nowadays.
that's right. So, but Envoy was redesigned for microservices architecture, right? As you think about the difference between east-west traffic and north-south traffic, Envoy was designed for that type of, truly designed for that scenario, and it supplanted Nginx or other types of technologies in that similar space. So when we looked at this space and saw the agent to agent interaction, human to agent interaction, about resiliency, about finding determinism where there's no determinism, we've built Arch to be able to address these concerns around guardrails, around routing, around function calling, around observability, so developers can focus more of their time on core high level objectives. And the essence is it's no longer just HTTP traffic, it's the nuanced prompt, which requires intelligence and science built into the infrastructure to make smart decisions, accurate decisions, cheap and fast decisions to improve the overall user experience, improve developer productivity. So we are also very heavily invested into task-specific small models that
Mm.
fit neatly into this piece of infrastructure called Arch. So it can make certain decisions instantly. For example, today, if one of the capabilities we provide for common, simple agentic scenarios and multi-step scenarios, we have a model called Arch function. It's trending #1 on Hugging Face as of a couple of weeks ago. I haven't looked at it at the moment, but that can make decisions from turning opaque prompts into precise API calls under 300 millisecond, 200 millisecond.
So it's
Right? So,
optimized for function calling specifically, which is a very common use case
which
for
is which is a common use case.
yeah.
That's right. And so we're just looking at the separation in terms of what are non-core, pesky, but repeated work that can move into the infrastructure layer. How do we think about history and how has it rhymed into the three-legged or four-legged stool architecture,
Yeah.
database, some compute, some middleware, etc., and some testing, if you would. And so we're operating at the networking layer for prompts, essentially, and trying to solve the cruftiness of it. At the moment, for example, Adil is working actively using these east to west traffic capabilities of Envoy to redesign the agent-to-agent communication bus.
Interesting.
Because, so agent-to-agent means, hey, I've sent you some work. You have to give it back to me in this format. What if the
Yeah.
format is wrong? You have to probably retry. And so the communication bug will make that transparent for developers, not have to think about these type of retries, or not have to think about these authentication concerns, not
Yeah.
have to think about browning out one agent because he's being super pesky and getting angry. Or I think that's true. It's going to happen soon. These agents are going to get angry, and then we have to manage them.
Hopefully not too
But that,
angry. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh,
It
but
also
that's the
reminds me of like protobuf and like having a consistent schema, like what does agent A expect for as its like interface versus agent B, and how do they kind of communicate with each other?
this is why I really like the work that you all did with the MCP server
Mhm.
framework that you built, because I think you're helping people build these capabilities, this framework to do this. And then I think one of the things you also mentioned, how do we help build best of breed technologies where the protocol is defined, but the enforcement of the protocol has to happen at a proxy layer,
Yeah.
right? And so, and I think both building the server, communications between the server and clients, this is where I think startups have an immediate advantage to be able to say, okay, I think we see eye to eye in the more general sense, and we have certain best of breed technologies. How do they work well together? And frankly speaking, I look to my right because he's actively working on that thing so we can deliver it for a customer scenario.
I love
And
it.
so as soon as I have a design doc, Sarmad, you'll get a copy of it
I would
for
love
free.
to. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
it. I'd love to hear more about it. Maybe one parting thought is I love the focus that you mentioned early on about customer use cases. So I guess like, are there any hero use cases that you've seen immediately benefit from Arch? Because it's almost like a uh, you kind of have to like think about your application at from a networking layer and an infrastructure layer perspective, where you're like, what are the things
yeah,
that are the business logic that I should be responsible for, and what are the things that I can kind of hand off to someone to do it like better for me. So are
yeah.
what are like the use cases that you've seen really thrive with this new kind of paradigm?
I think the one thing that we have seen a consistent theme, and that's partly because we have biased some of the conversations. So it's a bit of like we have to like get back and sort of assess more of the needs, is when people have had made investments in APIs and existing infrastructure, and they want to be able to leverage that infrastructure work that they've done, which power their either their SaaS experience or some sort of mobile experience, if you would,
Yeah.
a web experience or mobile. They want to be able to take that to the agentic world because essentially that is some of the moat that they've built. We actually shine really well, which is we take that investment and get you to be agentic in minutes.
That's amazing.
Example is Red Hat, right?
Yeah.
And I openly share some of our design partners because there's a for startups, I think there's a whole bunch of places we all can contribute and build with these customers, which is they want to be able to have their operators who operate on Red Hat infrastructure not have to go through multiple CLIs, which are well defined, not have to go through multiple APIs or Kubernetes, which are well defined. They
Yeah.
just want to be able to have them complete their work. They just want to get to being agentic now. And
Yeah.
so that is a hero use case that emerges pretty quickly. The other one is, man, I don't want to be in the business of reinventing observability, and I only need you for all the observability pieces, which is
Yeah.
not the sink, but I need you to be the source.
Yeah.
Transparently add traces, logs, and metrics. And so I will get this in all the different tools I use today, Honeycomb, Signos, tracing. So those
Yeah.
two use cases do emerge, which is a very simple scenario, observability and traces and routes. And the other, which is I want to be agentic now. I
Yeah.
have years of investment and I don't want to restart everything over if I can avoid it. And there are some patterns that it does fit, like function calling fits in that scenario pretty neatly.
I love that. And just like observability has been a pet peeve of mine because I think there's fundamentally nothing inherently new about LLM observability that you don't get with distributed systems observability. But it's the hard part is actually like, having the source and doing it correctly and in an ideally like
Yeah,
an automated fashion. And so I
yeah.
love that. And also I believe that I think over time all pieces of software will become AI native in some way. And so, like having AI capabilities in line of business applications will just be how software is by default
I agree.
in the near future. And so, making that easy is like I think phenomenal. And that's one of the things that will always be true. Everybody will want
I think
things to be more
so.
agentic. Yeah,
Yeah, I think so. I think the idea would be, as businesses, it's hard, especially for infrastructure and platform companies. We just have to focus on what we think from a user experience and developer productivity won't change. The tools will change, the
yeah,
shape will change. We just have to adapt quickly into the market and continue to
absolutely.
build on behalf of the developers we love, because that's all I've done for the past 15 years. And so I don't know much any different. Like, I think one of the dark days of any startup is like, hey, am I building for the right class of customers? Should I do something in consumer apps? I'm like, what would I do? I'll be clueless. So,
Yeah.
um, but no, it's been a fun ride. And the best part about a ride like this is to meet people like you who took time, and I did not know you before our interactions with LinkedIn. And I
Yeah.
look back and saying that I would have made certain really real connections with founders on a different part of the United States, a different part of the world, where we can sort of speak and have a conversation about how this future is shaping and how can we shape the future together, which is super cool.
These are the most energizing parts of my days, just chatting with other founders. And like I feel very blessed about being able to be in a position to be at the forefront of a revolution happening
Yeah,
in computing. And so it's definitely a privilege for us to be able to do that. And also
yeah.
just I'm very grateful for you for taking the time to share your insights. I think
No,
I've
this is
learned a whole
awesome.
bunch through this conversation alone. So thank
Oh
you.
man, I wish I was doing less of the talking and learning more about what you all was building, but I follow your podcast and I will continue to do so. And next time I'm in New York, we maybe do something live. Who knows?
Yes, that would be great. We're in the Empire State Building, and so it's a nice sunny day out here today. Hopefully, it will be
Yeah.
when you visit as well.
Yeah, if you look at the Seattle weather that I've got behind me, you will not be envious of missing out on what's happening in Seattle.
Well, it's beautiful in summers, I think, that
Yeah,
in
that's true.
Seattle. So
That's true. That's true. That's true.
awesome. Salman, thank
Um,
you so much. I'll
yeah, thanks
stop
for having
recording
me,
now.
Sarmad. This was
Yeah, of
awesome. Yeah.
course. Thank you.